Nobody is smart enough to be wrong all the time. That is one of many quotes by no one other than Ken Wilber, who is the topic of today's video. And I want to dive into why he's been called the most important philosopher you never heard of, the Einstein of consciousness, and the Hegel of Eastern spirituality. And I also want to dive into why his many books had such a huge impact on my life and the life of many others. It was a little bit more than 5 years ago, in the summer of 2017, when I just turned 18. I just graduated from high school, and I found myself in the situation, or in these circumstances, where I slowly became more and more aware of myself, or the things that were happening inside of me, especially my own suffering, my own inadequacies. But I also became more and more aware of the outer world, of the exterior world, of some of the suffering, some of the horrors, some of the chaos that's been happening all around the world, that's still happening all around the world, and that has always been happening all around the world. And in this situation, I just felt like I was left alone, all by myself, as I eventually developed a huge or a great frustration with all kinds of authorities, like my parents, like my teachers in school, politicians, and so on, as they all had these images about how life should be, how I should be, and they all tried to fit me into those images, into those expectations. But I wasn't able to fulfill them, because these expectations, let's say from society, they were not aligned with who I was at that time, or who I am in general. And through that, there was so much conflict, and then also so much confusion, because I didn't understand what people want from me, and I also didn't really understand why people do things in the way they are doing them. I didn't really get the meaning behind what most people were doing. And you could say that this led me to a crisis, or to a time of a lot of confusion and a lot of insecurity, where I was then propelled to go on my own search for meaning. I was propelled to go on my own quest of finding answers to a lot of the big questions in life that were then facing me, or that I then needed to face in order to understand myself, other people, and the world we're living in. And then I started to read a lot of different philosophy books, especially the French philosophers who were speaking or talking about existence, like Albert Camus or Jean-Paul Sartre. And I was also starting to read some things in the field of politics, some things in the field of economics. And then I inevitably kind of also became very curious about psychology, which makes sense when you want to understand yourself and other people, and your own childhood and teenage years and everything you've experienced. And then in the summer of 2017, I was sitting with a friend of mine on his balcony, and we were just talking, pondering the state of the world, just exchanging our perspectives on things. And then I asked him, are you into psychology? Because I wanted to know if on his own journey he also started to read something in that field or in that discipline. And then I think he didn't even answer me. He just went inside of the house, and then he came back with this book that eventually turned out to have a very great impact on my life. And that book was The Eye of Spirit by Ken Wilber. And then he pointed me to a chapter which was basically an outline of an integral psychology, where Wilber was making the case for synthesizing the Western schools of thought or Western psychology with the old Eastern traditions like Buddhism, yoga, Hinduism. But even more so, that book was not just about integrating different schools of psychology, it was even more so about integrating everything. It was about integrating all human knowledge into one framework. And that definitely blew my mind at the time. Because for the first time, when I was then reading Wilber, I was able to clear a lot of my confusion. I was able to relate all of the things that I was trying to understand at that time. And I was able to see how they overlap. I was able to see how all different kinds of disciplines have their own filter through which they see reality, and I was able to see how these filters are different and how they focus on different parts of reality. And then the first concept that I want to present to you, which is probably the most important concept in Wilber's teaching, in Wilber's teachings, it's called the 4 quadrants or the 4 phases of truth. And this concept is also in alignment, or also goes back to the quote at the beginning of this video: nobody is smart enough to be wrong all the time. And this essentially means that, also in Wilber's own words, everybody is right. And maybe I will just give you a little clip here to let him explain this in his own words.
One of the sort of catchphrases we use is everybody's right. And of course, it doesn't mean everybody's equally right. I mean, some are more right than others, but everybody has a piece of the truth. I can't imagine a human being at any point in our history that would latch on to a worldview, to an idea that was 100% wrong.
You didn't meet my grandmother, did you?
Yeah. But I just don't think the human mind can create 100% error.
Right.
As we say, nobody's smart enough to be wrong all the time. And so there's some true but partial truths in all of these areas.
Then when we have this idea in mind, then now we can look at the 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants are essentially just 4 dimensions that all humans use in order to approach life. And I can put a picture somewhere here so you can understand them very clearly, or you can understand them visually, which is a little bit easier. And then if you look at those quadrants, by the way, Wilber hasn't been the first person who discovered those quadrants or those categories. Plato also talked about the good, the true, and the beautiful, which is also a way of describing those 4 quadrants. Sometimes 2 of them get reduced into 1 to make it even simpler. But if we look at those quadrants, we can see there's the 1 quadrant, which is the individual interior quadrant. Then there's another quadrant, which is the individual exterior quadrant. And then we also have the distinction between the individual and the collective. So again, we have the interior collective quadrant and the exterior collective quadrant. And then we have the left-hand side, which is all about the interior, and we have the right-hand side, which is all about the exterior, on the individual level and on the collective level. And then when you look at this, you can then see that the individual internal or interior quadrant is all about consciousness. It's about worldviews, our values, purpose, knowledge. The individual exterior quadrant is about behavior. It's about habits, skills, communication, health. The collective internal is about culture. It's the intersubjective. The culture, shared values, shared purpose, social norms, history. And then we also have the collective exterior quadrant, which is all about the interobjective stuff. It's about systems, structures, purposes, agreements, metrics. And what comes along with those quadrants is that we can understand how certain disciplines try to reduce all the other quadrants into their own quadrant, into their approach to life. For example, people who are materialistic in their thinking, they basically say everything that's physical, everything that's material, that's reality. Everything else is just irrelevant, it's just a byproduct, it's just the ghost in the machine. We can't study that, it's not important, it's not even real. And then we have the same thing on the other side, where people say only the subjective experience is real, everything objective is just an illusion, and so on. And we can also see how sometimes there's, especially in today's day and age, there's a dissociation between the quadrants. Instead of us differentiating them and integrating all of them, sometimes they just get dissociated, and we no longer understand that they are there, or some people no longer understand that they are there, and then that creates a lot of confusion and a lot of problems. So if we understand what kind of disciplines we're studying currently, in which quadrants they fit, what people have talked about and where they're situated and what kind of quadrant, this makes it so much easier to orient ourselves in the world and to understand the world a little bit better. And here again, what makes Wilbur so brilliant, or what he brought to the table, is that he talked about how all of our history relates to those quadrants, how everything that's happening in today's day and world relates or fits into those quadrants. And that's really where his teachings come to shine. And then the last aspect of his teachings, or the second most important aspect of his teachings that I want to present, is that when we look at those four quadrants, for example, the individual interior quadrant, they are not just flat, there are stages of development. For example, the stages of human development, from a baby, from the pre-rational stages, where we can speak, then we learn to speak, but then what we say or what we think, if we even think something, that also needs to be developed. It's irrational, it doesn't make sense, it's very limited. But then we grow up, we become teenagers, we eventually become adults, and in that time we develop rational thinking, we expand our mental agencies, we include everything that came in the lower stages of development, and then we have more inclusive and bigger stages of development, and then it goes even farther than that. Then we come to the transpersonal stages of development, and here again what Wilber has done is that he looked at all different cultures around the world. He looked at all different kinds of teachings around the world, and then he fit that into one model, into one way of understanding human development, which is extremely comprehensive, because he integrates Freud, Piaget, Kohlberg with Buddha, with Buddhism in general, with Hinduism, with yoga, what they had to say about these stages of development. And then we can look at the other quadrants, and there are also those growth hierarchies. There are also these stages of development in cultures, in systems, it's here in the collective exterior, but we can also see those in the individual interior, where we have atoms, molecules, and then even higher and higher organisms. And if we understand all of those stages of development, then we can understand the culture wars that are happening today, because these wars exist between different stages, and most of these stages, of course, again, also think that only their stage is the best stage or the only stage. But these stages all fit together, and the higher you go, the more inclusive you are of the lower stages. So it's not about, again, dissociating yourself from them, but it's again about differentiating. And that makes also so many things so much easier to understand when you try to understand yourself, the world you live in, other people, other nations, other societies, other cultures. And then you can really see how they relate to each other and how they fit into one framework. And what comes with that, which I also want to mention, is the pre-trans fallacy that has been described by Wilber. And what that actually means is that there's a confusion about the pre-rational and the pre-personal stages of human development, the childlike stages of development, with the trans-rational or the trans-personal stages of development, which is where we would locate people like Buddha, like Jesus, saints who had an extremely high understanding and perception of reality. And the thing about those trans-rational stages is that they're not rational. For example, the experience of unity consciousness, which is sometimes called enlightenment or satori. In every different culture throughout history, there has been a different word for that. I think metamorphosis has also been one of those words used to describe this experience or state of enlightenment. And that's nothing that seems rational or logical to us. And what then happens is that some people say, okay, those higher stages, they're not real, because they think, because they're not rational, they think they're irrational, they think they're pre-rational, they think it's a transgression to childlike stages, they think it's a going back in development instead of actually a leap forward in development. And I can again show you a little clip from Wilber here to understand that a little bit better.
And particularly as we moved into modernity, then science tended to step to the foreground. And the form of religion that was most common, which is often called mythic literal, like fundamentalist religion. Moses really did part the Red Sea. Elijah really did go straight to heaven while he was still alive in his chariot. Lot's wife really was turned to a pillar of salt, those kinds of things. Those tended to be looked down on. And science, with its evidence and its repeatable truths, tended to displace religion as a source of truth. But there was one other type of spirituality that wasn't being included in that, and that is the one type, the mythic literal type, that indeed tended to have problems. But there was another type which wasn't a belief system, and it wasn't just a mythic narrative, but was actually a psychotechnology of consciousness transformation. There was a way to actually transform human consciousness from this sort of narrow, finite, limited, skin-encapsulated ego to what the Sufis call the supreme identity, an identity with spirit and all of manifestation. Mm-hmm. Zen calls these experiences satori, and a lot of people have heard that name. Those continued to be as true as when they were first introduced. But unfortunately, they got mixed up with the mere belief systems